left, right.
SipTalk, the wildly provocative podcast. This is it. Actually, tonight we're talking about legalizing marijuana use. I know they just did it today in New Jersey, so I want to know your thoughts on this. Is marijuana a gateway drug? Is legalizing marijuana a good idea, a bad idea? What's going to happen? Love your feedback. So let me know in the comments, and see you on the other end. This is Sip Talk. Grab a drink and enjoy.
Crisis film.
Cheers.
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 All right, we are live. Welcome to Sip Talk, episode 180. Today we are talking about legalizing marijuana. My name is Justin DiGiulio, out of my basement in New Jersey, joined by James, the Boswell, Philosopher. What are the other things you do? Professional referee, professional bartender, and most exciting of all, accountant. Shit, you caught me off guard. We're talking today about legalizing marijuana. I sound high. We actually just ran into an issue.
I would have let off
instead
of saying we're talking about legalizing marijuana. I just said tonight we're doing drugs.
Tonight we are doing drugs. That's what it sounds like. We had an issue just now, which caught me off guard. The whole reason going live on TikTok because I mentioned the word marijuana in the TikTok live title, and it actually banned us from going live. So that was a little interesting. I didn't realize what it was right off the bat, but we were banned because we used the word marijuana. So now I just said legalizing MJ-wana. And I guess that one works on TikTok. So hello, TikTok. I believe we are live on the other platforms. Those you want to get involved tonight can join us live between the hours of 8:30 and 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. You just have to click the link in my Instagram profile, and you will pop up on our screen, and we will let you in if we think you're good looking. But we really won't know until you get into the episode. And we love your perspective on the marijuanas. So, James, what led you? This was your topic suggestion, by the way. So I'm curious because it's a big day in New Jersey history. I'm not well, we'll get there. But what made you want to bring this topic up tonight?
It's something that has been getting a little bit more traction recently, but it really over the last decade, it's really accelerated. Like I probably have to disclose, I own a whole bunch of stock in pot companies, so my opinions here are not really colored by the fact that I own these positions, but
Just for the
probably
record,
still need to disclose it.
I don't think you are legally obligated to disclose your financial interest in marijuana companies for the sake of our episode. But
Yeah,
I'm
I'm still
glad
gonna
you got
cover my butt.
morally, I'm glad you got that off your shoulders.
But
So
yeah, like ever since Colorado legalized it, or even you can go farther back and say that like medicinal marijuana was legalized, I think first in California. Um, it's something that I don't smoke pot, but I don't see why it should be illegal.
I I somewhat agree with you there as well. So let's start off with what the date. So we were recording this episode on April 21st, coincidentally, the day after April 20th, which is 420, which is the National Marijuana Day. However, April 21, 2022 was when recreational marijuana use was legalized in, well, I was going to say
New
my home
Jersey.
state. Yeah, but I don't claim it as my home state. I spend more time, anyways, in the city. So, New Jersey, it is now legal as of today to buy recreational marijuana. I believe there is 16 places that you can buy it as of today. I haven't. I guess I'll hear on the news tomorrow morning when I get up how the sales turned out. I imagine these places were just fucking bombarded with people wanting to buy some weed.
Isn't it legal recreationally in New York as well?
I don't think it's legal recreationally. I think it might be legal medically, and that
Or
is
has it been like decriminalized?
so it has been decriminalized, meaning you can't be arrested for it. So a couple of things we got to talk about. We got to talk about the difference between legalized and decriminalized, and we have to talk about the difference between medical use and recreational use, and we also need to talk about the racial disparity. Basically, the fact that black and brown people and people of color are arrested at a vastly greater rate than white people are for marijuana use, which I think that in itself would be a reason to, just looking at the numbers would be a reason to decriminalize it, because it only looks like there is one category of people being charged and being criminalized, being held criminally liable for the use of marijuana. So let me ask you, it's your idea. Where do we start on the great topic of marijuana? Actually, let's start with this. What's your weapon of choice tonight?
Bush Ice again. I can't be going too hard tonight because we did a $9 million loan sale yesterday, and we are still trying to like tie off some of the ends on that, and I'm still not done with it. So I've got some mortgage work to do after the cast tonight.
Oh, the tying of the ends on the loans. Okay, well, that's a good loan. That's not a bad loan. I have see some Bush Ice. I got some Dewars on ice tonight, which is generally my weapon of choice. Maybe not the best weapon, but it does the job. Let's back up a little bit, though, because I feel like this might get some attention tonight. But speaking of weapons, I spent last weekend pulling weeds and bushes and just tons of vines and shit off of a bunch of trees in front of my house. I want to kind of replant that area with some nice pine trees to kind of give some privacy from the road. But before I can do that, I have to get all the vines and the weeds because they will just kill anything that I plant out there. While I was out there, there were some giant vines, like 3 inches, maybe even wider, going up some of these trees. And we had to pull these bushes out of the ground. So lots of digging, lots of pulling vines like fucking Tarzan out of the trees. The neighbor came across the street and said, "Hey, there's a lot of poison ivy in this area. So just be aware." And she's like, "Oh, we have some over here." And she's trying to find it, couldn't find any to point out. Now, I know poison ivy as that kind of leafy, I guess, they come in
3 leaves and they're oily looking.
Yeah, they're green. I thought they had some red polka dots on them, but what I
Nope.
found since they don't.
No,
But
they give you red polka dots.
yeah, they give you red polka dots, all right. However, no issues. Didn't have any itchiness or anything. Next day, went back out to work, pulled some more shit. It was not until Monday that I got a little bit of itch on my forearms, and I had shaved my head. I shave my head every day, and I nicked something on the side of my head. It felt a little funny, but nothing bad. That night, I was trying not to itch, and a friend of mine who came out to help, Bruno, the Italian chef, he came out to help, and he said, "Hey, I think there was some poison ivy out there. I got it kind of bad, like my armpit or my elbow or something." I was like, "Oh, yeah, I think I might have gotten a little too." Woke up the next day, further down my forearms, worse on my forehead, and then the next day, even worse. So now we're talking like 4 days after, and now it's Thursday, and I did this on Saturday. So something about poison ivy. One, the vines that were 4 inches, 4 inches across, literally bigger than my wrist. And you could see some of the freaking poison ivy on my wrist. These vines that were bigger than my wrist, old ass poison ivy. Decades old poison ivy that had grown up this tree.
Wow,
And
I didn't know it could get that big.
it is the freakiest looking poison ivy you could ever imagine. I'm going to throw some up on the screen.
Yo, I gotta say though, be glad that you don't have fire ants. I was mowing my lawn on Sunday, stepped in a fire ant mound, and my ankles got bit up real bad on Monday. Like both of my feet looked like I was diabetic.
Wow. Yeah, I actually saw a couple of red ants, but nothing too bad. I don't think I'll be able to show this on the.
So yeah, my plan for this weekend is to go to Home Depot and buy whatever tools I need to commit entomological genocide.
What is entomology?
Study of insects.
Oh, so okay, yeah. So you can get some good stuff. So I'm going to text you these pictures. I have it up on TikTok. and then there's another picture of
Yeah.
this poison ivy.
All right, let's
leaf.
move into the pots.
Okay, I'm down with getting into pot. All right, so
So one thing I'd like to talk about is like just how drastically public opinion has shifted on it.
where do you want to start? You want to start with that article with the stats there?
I want to just go with the polls. That like I don't know if you opened up the polling report. Data?
I read probably like 60 of them. It just kept going. I think I got close to the end.
And they're all kind of the same. The pattern is very similar.
Well, read like the first couple of them, the ones that go like decade by decade.
Yeah, so I like this one. So the question is, do you think the use of marijuana should be legal or not? And I'm gonna go every 5 years. So in 1969, 12% thought it should be legal. 84% said no. By 1995, it was 25% legal, 73% not. So not a big shift between 69 and 95. In 2000, 31% and 64% against.
Well, hold on, wait, back up. Think about 1969 and the 70s. Who was using pot? There was
Hippies.
It was hippies, and it was a much smaller group. It's a much smaller group, and they didn't occupy the majority by any means.
Because like if you think about stereotypical 1950s America,
Well, there
that
are no
really
hippies, and then
yeah, but also that era of like 1950s Leave It to Beaver America really persisted until about 1965 or 1966.
I think we've talked about this in the podcast before. That how we think of the 60s is actually really more the 70s. Right?
Yeah,
Like
because
that
it
kind
was
of
really
hippie-
68
yeah.
and 69 where things started to really shift and kind of had the culture of the 60s that we think of.
Well, it started getting the attention, the Woodstock. What year was Vietnam? That was a 70,
Vietnam? No, it was late 60s that it started.
late 60s.
Let me find
so
out.
you have that real hippie backlash culture that's getting the press, that's on TV. People are talking about it, and it's growing. But it's still that small.
Technically started in
minority.
1954.
Oh shit!
I would
Okay.
not have gotten that right.
But and Raj brings up a good point. The amount of tobacco smoking at the time, everybody was smoking cigarettes back.
Yeah, I
then,
love the
40s,
ads that
50s.
say like doctors recommend Newport.
Well, and we will get there, but that's kind of how I feel
All right,
right
U.S.
now
involvement was
about-
1964 is when we started.
Okay, but that's
So 1964 to 1973 was Vietnam.
Don't worry, I wasn't saying anything at all. How I feel right now about weed is that we have this hardcore people are walking around like they found Jesus and they're trying to spread the word of the Lord. Saying, weed does this, hemp does this. Look at my shoes; they're made out of hemp. Hemp can solve the world's problems.
Yeah.
And so I don't necessarily know about that, but I feel like we have an element of the doctors recommend Newports when it comes to weed. So look, where hit the rest of the stats. So you hit
All right,
95.
so I'm going to say hi to Shahir real quick. Glad for her to be joining us again. So yeah, in 2000, 31% opposed. 31% were in favor of legalizing it, and 64% were against. So it's still like the national consensus was that pot should stay illegal. We're going to go forward 10 years. In 2011, it's 50 to 46. So now it's pretty much evenly split. It's like 2010, it was 46-50. 2011, it was 50 to 46. So you can look somewhere between 2010 and 2011 is when it was like dead even.
Well, think about 2000. Who's smoking weed in 2000? Like grunge rock, right?
Yeah, college
then,
kids.
and then still your hippies and your college kids, which those college kids and the college kids after them perpetuated the marijuana smoking, which is probably why over the next decade its acceptedness.
Yeah, and think about when we were in high school, because 2000 lines up dead in the middle of that. Like, who were the people that were smoking pot when we were in high school?
Well, I don't want to be the one to say it, but the ones that were openly and regularly smoking pot were what we would call the
kind of the burnouts.
Yeah, there you go. Like these guys weren't on the top of the socioeconomic ladder in high school. Now, I can tell you that the people that were on the top of the socioeconomic ladder were smoking
drinking
weed. Well, yeah, but they were also smoking weed just more discreetly.
True.
and they were also drinking. But that's where also the racial disparity comes into
Yeah.
play here.
So, anyways, from 2011 to today, so the last poll that I have dated was in October of 2021. Now, 68% of people approve of it. 68% of people think that it should be legal.
Now,
6 months ago, which is effectively now.
Well, that's effectively now as far as polling works.
And it was the same a year before that, like dead on the exact same number, 68 to 32.
What I'd like to get is if you guys are watching live on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, wherever, and you want to share some marijuana experience with us, if it's the first time and maybe you had a freak out, whatever it might be, you can click the link in my Instagram and it can bring you right on board into the podcast. You don't have to be on video. You can do audio only. You click that link. We would love to hear your marijuana stories.
And if you want to comment about why you think it should or shouldn't be legalized, we want to hear about that one as well. Especially you, Maria Salas.
I think, well, let me back up. So here's my thoughts as to why it makes sense. And maybe we can hit some of the data and it'll cover some of this as well. But one, it's generally already very widely available.
Yeah.
Except it's all being sold illegally.
Well, no.
Not
in states like California or
Colorado,
I guess New Jersey today.
There's a next to zero mortality rate.
It's almost impossible to overdose on THC. In order to overdose on THC, you would have to pretty much overdose on something else first.
Yeah, or it would have to be laced with something else.
Yeah, but like even if you were to have like purified THC, it would take so much of it for you to have like a true adverse reaction to the drug itself in terms of an overdose.
And then also,
like,
look,
I'm sure you wouldn't feel good, but in terms of overdosing, no.
Well, you might freak out, and one of the downsides is, and we talked about this right before we went on air, is psychosis, where you kind of become delusional and detached from reality, have some hallucinations, and that's why I'm hoping somebody who has tried marijuana for the first time and remembers and wants to share that experience will.
Well, I can actually chime in on that because there was a short period of my life, maybe a year and a half or 2 years, where I smoked, and what made me quit was realizing that like I didn't like where my thoughts were going when I was high. Like like I'm not someone that's prone to anxiety or like negative thoughts, but when I would get high, that would happen. I would just like be anxious or have like kind of disturbing thoughts, and it got to the point where I said, I don't like the way this makes me feel. So I'm going to stop.
Yeah, I think you have a lot less control over where your brain goes and what it hyper focuses on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, if you it's easy enough to hyper focus on something in the real world when you're not on drugs, when you're not high on marijuana. But when you are, the hyper focus is that much more extreme. And what the thing about hyper focus is if you're obsessing over something in real life, like think about when you're like in high school or something, obsessing over a girl, or somebody goes through a breakup and they're like still obsessive. Imagine, and you can't control that, like you're super depressed. Now imagine that being times 100. You have less and less control the more extreme it becomes. So
yeah, that's the issue, is that you can kind of just get lost in your own head with pots, and it's kind of an interesting contradiction where some people with anxiety find that the pots really help them, and other people who don't have anxiety find that it gives them anxiety, or for people with anxiety it makes it worse. Why it has such a differential effect on different people, I will never know. Shahir Abba says that it's addictive, and I don't think that's actually true. I think there's a difference between habits and addiction.
Well, not at a chemical level. The chemical
so
THC.
Can you get habituated to the pots? Absolutely. Will you have a physical addiction to it? I don't think so.
Well, it would be like saying someone is addicted to running. And running there's no addictive quality to running. But what happens is you kind of habituate it. You get addicted to the things that go along with it. And that's your way to express those chemicals in your brain.
Yeah, so like if you're thing is like you smoke pot at some time during the day. That's just a habit, and you get used to saying, okay, at 8 o'clock at night, I'm going to have a joint, and but it's different than a true addiction where your body's not going to go through physiological distress in the absence of the drug.
Well, I've heard that argued a little bit, but the chemical itself is not addictive. Okay, so reasons why I think it makes sense. It's already widely available, next to zero mortality rate. Stoners don't want to do anything. You get somebody all like pumped full of hallucinogens or uh, some other wild drugs. They kind of go crazy in the streets. Uh, Alcohol, people can go crazy. They lose their inhibitions. They get behind the wheel. They do some drunk driving. If you're stoned, like you just want to chill. Like
So there was an episode of South Park that addressed that. And because there's a lot of fear mongering among the people that are still opposed to marijuana in terms of what it'll make you do. And Shihiro Aba says that the people that she knows that do it need to do it all the time. And that's a pretty common trait I find of people that smoke. Like some of the people that I smoke all the time, like every day, multiple times a day,
well,
and that's the habituation and everything. But like the point that South Park made at like the kind of the ending of the episode was pot's not really going to harm you directly, but it's just going to make you lazy and boring, and you're not going to accomplish very much.
but I don't think there's anything negative about that. It doesn't make you want to do anything crazy. It just makes you really not have much motivation. So on an
Yeah, but if you
individual
do that
level,
too much, then you just don't have motivation to do anything, and like your ambitions in life start to deteriorate.
well, it's good for Domino's. That's
Yeah, and Taco Bell.
I ate Taco Bell today. Actually, that was probably a mistake. But
Shihiro Aba says, I see them get very irritable and anxious without it. So I also agree with what she's saying in terms of the observation she's making. And the counterpoint that I would make there would be that I don't think they're addicted to pot. They're using pot as their way to deal with irritability and anxiousness, and they're not building up other like coping mechanisms with how to deal with these problems. They're using marijuana as a crutch.
I want to. There's a couple more comments. Hopefully, Rosh will send them our way. I just want to round up my list of why it makes sense. Good for Domino's. Stoners don't do much harm. They just don't do much of anything.
Yep.
It's good for states' tax revenue.
Mm-hmm.
There would be less crime because we would just be eliminating a category of crime.
Well, and there's also the racial disparity enforcement.
And yeah, and that's the racial aspect. And then I really couldn't think of much widespread harm that would come from it. Now,
Yeah, and when you think about like what's the societal level of harm caused by pot, and then you think about something like alcohol or opioids, you're not even you're talking orders of magnitudes difference.
sure, but I also think it's how marijuana affects you and how you use it. So I know people who drink a lot, and I know people who, James, I'll let you hit those comments in 1 second.
Sure.
And I know people who drink a lot, and I know people who smoke a lot. Now, the people who smoke, they they light up on their ride in or on their way in, on their commute in or on their walk into the office. On their lunch break, they light up. On their way home, they light up. And in the evening, they light up. Now, I don't know anybody that drinks alcohol that pours themselves a glass of Cabernet on their commute into the office.
Really, that behavior is reserved for problem alcoholics.
For problematic alcoholics. Now, bear in mind, weed affects your functionality. You're going to be slower. You're going to be a bit spaced out. It's not just like alcohol. It's very similar to alcohol. So I'm all for it being legalized, but it's the usage. Now, many times during the day, I have a beer or two on my lunch break, and I come back and maybe I'm a bit slower, or I misspell something in an email, but it's not affecting me in a great way. So, James, you want to hit these comments, and I want to talk.
Yeah,
I
got a comment on a different platform by text, talking about how legalizing pot would reduce crime. Well, like
Well, if you eliminate
legalizing murder
crime,
would also reduce crime
yeah,
because, like,
that's if you eliminate that crime as a category,
yeah.
So.
All right,
Do you want to
so
hit the comments that Raj just sent?
the Lisa Salazar says the first time she smoked, I had no reaction. I didn't even feel high, so I didn't do it again until a year later. And then they tried an edible, and I was laughing, I was crying, too many emotions at once. So edibles are tricky because you don't know how much you're getting until it's too late. Because
Yep.
if you're smoking, you're going to get the feeling, like, first of all, you're doing it puff by puff, so you're not getting like a massive dose all at once. And with each puff, you get a reaction in probably 10 to 15 seconds, if not less. Whereas with an edible, you eat it and you might have to wait 20, 30, 60 minutes for
Yeah,
anything.
we had an incident where I was with somebody who had an edible 2 weekends ago, and he had taken it right before I arrived, and I just kind of thought they were joking around. He's like, "Oh yeah, I had a whole one." I don't know, really. I said, "Oh, can I see the box?" And then I'm like trying to do the math about kind of what was in there, because I don't know much about marijuana, edibles, and I'm more of an alcohol guy. And then we're just kind of chilling out at the bar, and this guy's like, "Oh, it's hitting me," and he puts his head down. And then, like, I could tell he's like, his body's kind of going a little limp. Now, he had taken this whole edible, and the guy that gave him to him said, "I only take a half." So
Yeah.
and he's like, "Well, I haven't done it in a while. What? Why not go big or go home?" I'm just thinking like, all right, well, I'm only here for a little while. Just you guys do you. I didn't have anything, and so we're sitting in the bar. He puts his head down on the bar just as the food comes, and I'm like, damn, this guy could have held out a little bit longer. Maybe the food would have helped a little bit. Either way, he starts going a little limp, like he's like actually sleeping, and then I kind of grab him, I'm like, dude, and so he stands up, and now we're at a bar. The bar stools are high, right? So he stands up, goes to lean back against the bar stool, and the stool just slides out from underneath him, and he literally does one of these, just tips right over, and he kind of catches himself, but then when he realizes that he is laying on the ground, which anybody else would be totally embarrassed about, he just goes to sleep. He's like, all right, I'm down.
That's took way too much, which is why, like, in California, the last couple times that I've had any THC has been in the form of edibles, and I like the drinks because the drinks are, again, you can like, they're almost like medicine bottles where they're graded by like how many milliliters are left in the bottle, so you can give yourself a pretty exact dose.
Oh, dude, I can't even dose myself with alcohol. I've had like three glasses of scotch, and we've been live for 26 minutes. So,
all right, let's hit some of these comments.
Yeah, there's a lot of comments. I'm really hoping somebody's going to call in and just share a story, and then we can kick you back off, because I want to share my perspective on this. But these comments are which we love.
So yeah,
are
so
distracting.
Shahir Abba says people
you guys
think
got to
they can
call in. You guys got to call in.
people think they can like take it while working or driving, and like, I think if you had to compare driving while stoned with driving while drunk, like, driving while stoned is preferable because you're less likely to take risks or overestimate your abilities while stoned. So like, you might make a mistake, but it's going to be at a lower speed. Whereas alcohol, you're just like, oh, cool, I can take this turn at 100. I've done it before.
Let's do 110.
So yeah, exactly. No, I'm not recommending either of the practices, but I think, again, when you have to look at potential harm, the pot is lower. And Jessica says the lazy statement is incorrect as it depends on mental strength. So yeah, I know some people that will smoke pot and then still be productive, but I think they're the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah, I would say they're the exception. So look, I want to talk about just real quick. I want to throw this data out there so we can actually reference it with what we're talking about, especially when it comes to driving. One of the articles you sent me today, and you'll have to cite it because I don't remember which one it was, so you can look it up while I'm sharing. But basically, their conclusion, and what college was it? Maybe Cornell. The legalization of marijuana reduces the demand for prescription drugs.
Yeah.
Specifically, drugs prescribed for pain, depression, anxiety, sleep, psychosis, and seizures. Now, so people are using marijuana in place of the opioids and for pain relievers, and in place of some of the other prescribed drugs, which is probably a good thing. Now, it's bad for big pharma. But I think one of the negatives that comes with that is when you're prescribed prescription medication, which is how one uses medication that is prescription by being prescribed it, those come with warnings like don't operate heavy machinery. When you're just smoking some weed, some grass that grows out of the ground, there's no warning that comes on the beanstalk there. So
Well,
I don't know necessarily
so
that.
one thing the article isn't clear about is whether this is prescribed drugs
Correct.
or
Yeah.
whether it's illicit use of prescription drugs.
Well, I would
'Cause-
imagine that they're
'cause, like,
talking about
There's
prescribed.
a difference between if I break my arm and the doctor gives me prescriptions for some codeine versus I find someone on the street and buy some codeine.
Well, I would, because they're citing specific ailments, I would imagine that it would be by prescription because that would be easier to track those ailments, and it sounds like a pretty sound study. But also, my thinking is that a lot of these people who have kind of some minor ailments or their life isn't just cruising at 60, the wind in their hair, they just want somebody to be high on. And
Yeah.
weed is a good alternative to being fully zonked out on some type of opioid that basically just shuts you off.
So, Lisa Salazar says another good comment here. I don't believe there's much harm. I just don't think it's good to smoke around people who don't like it, especially in parks where kids are, or at work. And I think that's pretty reasonable.
Well, look,
Like,
first off, it fucking reeks.
yeah,
Marijuana. It's not a good smell. I don't think, for the same reason I don't think it's good to fart around people. You don't want to be smoking weed around people because it stinks. I don't think people are going to get that high off of secondhand smoke unless you're like trapped in an elevator or a car.
no.
But I just think it's kind of rude and also kind of gross because it is some skunky smelling skanky shit.
Yeah, but it's the same thing of like someone smoking a cigar in the park. Like a cigar is just as pungent.
Yeah, I like cigars smell way better
Okay,
than
but
marijuana.
like you have to be honest and say that like if you don't like either smell, they're both pretty strong.
I recently learned that in Japan they are very turned. They don't use smell is almost like noise complaints. We like have respect for people and we keep our volume low. In Japan, they do the same thing around smell, and they're very turned off by tourists, especially European tourists, who use a lot of cologne and perfume.
Huh.
So that's something that like if you were to go to Japan, you wouldn't want to be like overly perfumed.
You see, that's not my experience with the Europeans. So let me quick aside. If you go into a grocery store or like a Target or something, and you go to the aisle that has deodorant, how many choices of deodorant are you going to have?
Like I don't know, 60.
Okay, sure, that like a
Yeah.
lot, right?
Yeah.
I went to a grocery store in Spain when I was living there and went to the aisle with deodorant. Take a guess how many different choices of deodorant I had.
Three or four.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's but Japan when it comes to smell, they are very reserved. So, let's see what else. I was at a restaurant this evening, so this is literally my restaurant placemat that I was taking notes on.
Oh, they give you they give you one of the ones that you can use with crayons. That's very considerate of them.
Actually,
Did you color in the lines this time?
I ordered a steak and it came out in a sizzling plate. Like it came out on the actual a cast iron plate on a piece of wood, and it was sizzling, and it got fucking grease all over my shit. Even though I moved this out of the way, so it's got grease splatters.
I would have thought that the crayon would have repelled that.
My shirt's got grease splatters all over it. All right. So I mentioned that people just want somebody to get high on, hemp shoes. So how about this? When it comes to legalizing marijuana, because I don't think marijuana is any worse than alcohol.
I don't either.
But think about I don't think there's any way it's worse than alcohol. But think about the culture that's around alcohol, and think about the culture that's around weed, and think about the way they affect you. So nowadays, if you don't drink, people have a certain perception of you. You're almost outcast if you don't drink.
Uh,
Yeah. But weed, it's, getting high isn't for everybody, and people are much more respectful of you if you don't get high.
I think that's because it's illegal.
You think?
Yeah. I think that that's the long-term effects of one of the two being legal, and there's also just so much more societal like acceptance of alcohol and cultural appropriation of alcohol that marijuana just hasn't had. Because like alcohol has been promoted in this country for, with the exception of like the 10 or 11 years of prohibition since the beginning of the country, and and I mean the beginning. If you look at the alcohol, I need to see if I can find this, but like when they were drafting the Constitution, the amount of alcohol that they consumed during that process was astounding.
I would love to. I would love to
Um,
see some information.
yeah,
on
the
that.
amount that people drank in like the 18th and 19th centuries is crazy. So alcohol has just had a bigger role in society for whatever reason, and marijuana has been culturally portrayed as something that minorities and foreigners brought in, and is
Well,
it's just been painted in a much more negative light. So
I've never thought about marijuana being a minority
that's,
and
if you
foreigner.
look at when it was like made federally illegal, I believe in the 30s, the the copy that went along with like the campaign to make it illegal was like very anti-Mexican, like kind of in the same way that like Looney Tunes is racist. You can look at like some of the copy from the uh,
Looney
campaign
Tunes is
against
racist?
marijuana, and it was like super racist against Mexicans.
How is Looney? I mean, I haven't watched Looney Tunes. I can't. I don't even know what it is. I
Um,
can't. I couldn't tell you. Pepe Le Pew, is he a Looney Tune?
Yeah, but like, yeah, I'll see if I can. I'll send you some links because like there are some Looney Tunes that when you like go back and watch, you're like, I cannot believe that this was something that they showed kids.
Well,
And like it's still valuable to watch because like it's a learning experience. In the same way that like if you watch like Disney's Dumbo with like the three black crows all being just completely stereotypes of black people, like that kind of stuff just existed in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and nobody thought anything of it. And now we look at it with today's lens and say that's not even remotely appropriate.
So look.
And I'm not saying that like these should be canceled or that people should never see them. I think it's useful to look
But
at them and say this is our history.
But yeah, and my issue with turning around and trying to cancel that stuff is like if they make weed legal across the U.S. recreationally and you smoke all day, all night, and then in 25 or 30 years they make it illegal and they say it's the most terrible thing, and then somebody shows a picture of you smoking weed 30 years prior and said you're a terrible person, you're like, well, I was just kind of doing what everybody else it was okay to do. I didn't, now I agree with you actually, but back then I didn't have the enlightenment that I have now.
Yeah.
That's it's really difficult. That's the issue with like prosecuting people, unless it's like really really bad, like rape or something like that. Prosecuting people for things that happened so long ago, and I think there's a certain statute of limitations.
Well, it varies based on the crime.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at. A certain statute of limitations that based on the crime and the severity of the crime.
And
Okay.
that's what the statute of limitations is for, is to make it so that like you can't be prosecuted for something after a amount of times. Otherwise, like you could just be open to prosecution for anything. Like after a certain amount of time, it's no longer worth it.
So we're talking a little bit about racism back in the 20s and 30s and 40s. Let's talk a little bit about racial disparity in marijuana arrests, because
So this one is wild.
well, okay. So hang on before you give the numbers. I want to share that I tried to do some research as to why there was such an insane statistical disparity between white people and people of color. People of color was what was commonly used. I didn't hear if it was black or Hispanic or Asian. I'm guessing it probably wasn't Asian, but
No. Well, what I'm seeing in this article is they're using the term black.
Okay, so what article and what is that? So the one that I'm talking about, I think
normal.org, and
okay.
So a 2021 analysis of marijuana related arrests in 2020 in New York
In New
City's
York
five
City,
borough
yeah.
showed that people of color comprised 94% of those arrested.
94. So
And
nearly every arrest
yeah,
was a person of color.
what's important to note is that black and white people use marijuana at statistically similar levels.
Yeah, actually very, very important. Yeah, so it's
Like
basically 50-50 usage.
yeah, like there's no difference in terms like if you're black or white, you're no more or less likely to smoke. All right, so a 2021 analysis from Milwaukee County in Wisconsin showed that black Wisconsinites were 4.3 times more likely than their white counterparts to have been convicted for using marijuana. The worst disparities were in Ozaukee County, I don't know where that is, where black people were 35 times more likely to be arrested, and Manitowoc County, where they were 30 times more likely to be arrested.
So I couldn't quite find out why this was. I spent a lot of time this evening trying to think about why black and brown people of color would be arrested and charged that much at a higher rate. And here's and I could be wrong on this. Okay, I'm sharing with you my experience. Um, Now I know considerably more white people that smoke marijuana or have smoked marijuana. Now, when I picture white people smoking marijuana, I picture a bunch of college kids smoking in a dorm room, blowing the weed smoke out of a paper towel roll stuffed with uh, paper towel roll stuffed with fabric softener sheets, those Bounty sheets.
As a filter?
Yeah, so they suck up the marijuana smoke and they blow it out the paper towel roll. And in the paper towel roll, there's a bunch of downy fabric softener sheets in the paper towel roll, and then they're puffing it out the window. Okay, that's my image in my head when I know of the people that I know smoking weed. Now it's a little, my vision of white people smoking weed has in New York City, kind of people sitting on their fire escape smoking. Now, let me tell you something. Now, I'm around a lot of people. I have the perspective of somebody who's lived in Manhattan for the last 12 years or so. And the thing that comes along with living in Manhattan is exposure. So you have a lot more exposure to people. You have a lot more exposure to culture. You have a lot more exposure to kind of general society and general zeitgeist than you do outside, where the populations are not as dense and the cultures are not as dense. So I'll tell you something. When I walk down the block, and this is almost an everyday event, I walk down the block every day, but nearly every day I smell weed on the block, any block. Now, the source of that weed, let me ask you, you think it's coming from a white person or a person of color? Almost, you don't have to answer. I'll just give you the answer. And it was almost implied by the tonality I used. Almost always it is a person of color. So that makes me think that it's easier to arrest a person of color because of the way that they're using marijuana.
Yeah, it's a complicated question.
But I can't figure out why else black and I don't think the cops are
I
saying
mean,
let
the
let,
only
let us
other
pat
answer
these
is
people
police
down.
are racist, and I think we've got ample evidence on that to justify that conclusion based
I
on a lot of other things.
sure, but if it was a simple police or racist, I could see the New York City stats being 65% people of color, 35% white, but it's 94% people of color. That's where I'm
Well, the
thinking
question is like,
there's gotta
if
be
the police catch a black person or a white person with similar quantities of marijuana, who's going to get arrested?
I didn't think about that actually, but I feel like I know a lot of white people where like the police have been like, all right, just give us the weed.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't imagine that would happen to a minority. So I'll
I have
give
a
you that.
friend who was caught in college with an ounce of pot in his dorm room, and he got arrested for it, and he didn't even get charged with a misdemeanor. And like an ounce, if you haven't been around pot, an ounce is a lot.
I haven't been around pot.
Um,
Definitely not
an
to know
ounce is a
even what an
lot,
ounce looks like. Can you show me
and
with your hands what an ounce looks like?
probably like close to that
Like
much.
a big Ziploc bag?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
all right.
This,
Well, so
and he got
he was
arrested
doing
for it,
financially
and
pretty
he had
well,
to
your
pay
friend.
some fines, and like he wasn't allowed to purchase a firearm for a couple of years. But after he got
Okay.
like he was booked and like and like probably immediately released on bond or maybe even no bond. But yeah, he had to pay a fine and he couldn't own a firearm for a while. But coming out of the experience, he just said, "Thank God I'm white."
But
Not disparaging black people, but just like acknowledging that like if he was black, he
that he
probably
had
would have
some
been in
privilege
prison.
there. Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, the fact that the stats are 94% of the arrests in New York City. And I can tell you, in living in New York City, my perspective is basically everybody's equal. It's a
Well, also stop and frisk.
but stop
You
and
know,
frisk.
stop and
But
frisk. Who did that target?
but for the most part, the way I don't yeah, well, stop and frisk. Obviously, it if you got like baggy jeans on, your pants are hanging over your ass, and you look a bit ratchet, police are going like right after you, and
Even if you're doing nothing wrong.
even if you're doing nothing wrong, and it could be again cultural, which unfortunately, but the it's. I just don't know why. I don't know why the numbers are that vastly. 94% is huge,
Yeah.
and I think if any reason to decriminalize marijuana as being criminal, it would be that. It would be that somehow it's just crazily unfairly targeting minorities. Is
My biggest argument would be so Colorado, I think it was 2012 that they legalized it in the state just entirely. They just said no longer criminal. Businesses can operate and sell marijuana in the open. We will not arrest you. And yes, we'll tax it and we'll regulate it, but it's legal. And at the time, that was huge. It was the first state to do it, and it was a tremendous experiment on their part. And they took a lot of risk. And if you look at what happened in Colorado, um, if you were to have to say what happened, the short answer would be nothing bad.
no, yeah, and that's and Colorado is no. I was just in Colorado. Colorado is known for marijuana use. Want to say hello to Lisa on YouTube. Welcome to
And yeah,
YouTube
Peter, if you
Live.
got something to say, we'd love to have you join in on the cast, video or audio or both.
I talked to Pete actually right before the podcast, and he shared with me he works at a bar in Midtown, cool Irish bar. Pete's an Irish dude, and he works at Irish bar in Midtown. He's saying that Fish was in town. Fish is known for
Yeah,
a lot
they're
of weed
pretty.
smoking. You go to a Fish,
They're the Grateful Dead 2.0.
yeah, you go to any Fish concert, people are smoking. In the concert in the stadium wherever you are, lots and lots of smoke. And he said that there was, for whatever reason, a ton of balloons. Like all these people had all these balloons, and that people were just going wild in the streets around Madison Square Garden, which is near where the Irish bar he works at. And they were sucking the helium from the from the balloons.
Yeah, that doesn't. That's weird.
Well, I also imagine, yeah, that is weird. I never got that. I never been one to want to have a high voice, uh, and uh, and that's what the helium does. That's what the helium
Yeah.
does for you. Yeah,
But yeah, my argument would basically be that like the racial disparity in enforcement is a huge issue, but you can just look and say what's the worst case scenario if we legalize it, and you can look to Colorado or any of the other 15 states that have legalized it and say nothing bad's happened. In fact, Colorado has like been able to take all the revenue, the tax revenue from the pot sales, and they've been able to put it back into their education system, and they've been able to put it into treatment centers for people that want to like stop doing drugs. They've been able to put that money to good use.
education would be a great use. Education would be a great use to use that tax money, and then obviously drug rehabilitation. And I think we talked a couple episodes ago about needle exchanges and things like that, or maybe that
Yeah,
was
harm
off air.
reduction.
But those are good programs, and people who are going to use drugs are going to use them. The goal is to rehabilitate these people and the people that have mental issues, to take care of them, treat them. But the people using drugs illegally, and that's a bit of my issue is if we're replacing these prescribed drugs with people who don't have to visit the doctor's office and just kind of self-treat their disorders. That's one of the downsides that I did think about with marijuana use. But I
Yeah. Actually, so another comment from Kevin is that hemp's illegal status can be traced back to big oil and big paper because the hemp product threatened both industries. So they demonized everything about the plant because they wanted to keep their monopolies.
interesting. But I mean, I don't give a fuck where the paper comes from or where the material comes from for making shoes.
Yeah, but if you're a paper
cargo
producer,
shorts
you
or something
do.
like that. If you yeah, but I don't, and I really think most people don't. It's just the religiosity factor behind the hemp and the marijuana use that I don't get, and I tried to do a little research also about lung cancer and marijuana smoke. But let me ask you a question. First off, this is what I found. A couple of things. What's in cigarettes? What are the chemicals? What if you're a cigarette manufacturer and you have tobacco leaves coming through one door and cigarettes leaving the other door? What else is being put into those cigarettes?
It depends. Some cigarette manufacturers, like Native American Spirit or whatever, those
American Spirit,
ones
yeah.
are just paper and tobacco. Like the tobacco is not really treated or anything. And so
Plus the
the
filter. Plus the
what
filter. Plus the
the
filter.
filter is just like polystyrene that like doesn't actually do anything.
Oh,
The
yeah.
reason why filters do nothing. Um, Filters were invented as a response from the cigarette industry to make it seem like cigarettes were less harmful. But
Well,
filters, in
filter.
terms of like, if you smoke a filtered versus an unfiltered cigarette, the effect to your body and the amount of tar that you're bringing into your lungs, about the same.
Yeah, very, very, very minimal difference. But there are some chemicals that are in the filters
The
that
the,
that
they don't, the filters don't add any chemicals that are introduced to your body.
what goes into marijuana.
Well, pot's
So,
gonna be pretty much
wait,
the
hold on.
same as.
You made an argument for the purity of cigarettes, and you used American Spirits as an example. That
I'm
is,
not making it. I'm not saying that they're good because the thing is, even when you burn tobacco, like, sure you're getting the nicotine, but you're also getting all the like carbonized deposits that are like in the smoke and the tar in the smoke, and like if you want to run an experiment, light up a cigarette, put the filter to a napkin, and then try and like breathe in through the napkin, and then look at the color of the napkin on the other side of the filter. That's what's going into your lungs.
yeah,
It's
very,
going to be
very
brown.
little.
I can
Yeah.
promise you that.
So now with marijuana, what's going into the you're going to roll some marijuana with some rolling papers.
It's basically the same. I think there's less tar in marijuana just by virtue of like the physiology of the plant, but
Now,
it's not harmless.
here would be something to Google: tobacco lungs versus weed lungs. Now, what I found, and I know you're searching that right now, what I found was that the results I got for weed lungs were actually worse than tobacco lungs. I expected them to be about the same.
So
Maybe weed to be a hair better.
one of the reasons could very well be that when people smoke a cigarette, they tend not to hold the smoke in their lungs very long. It's usually puff, like inhale, and then immediately exhale. So it's kind of the same motion as breathing.
Probably
Whereas
because they
people
can
that
buy
smoke,
a carton of cigarettes. You
right,
can't buy a
but
carton
whereas
of weed.
people who are smoking pot very often breathe it in and hold it as
Hold it.
long as they can.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you? So, what do the results show that you got?
Nothing conclusive yet.
Okay. What I found was that the weed lungs were actually worse, although I don't necessarily believe it. I
Here,
think
I'm
there's some
seeing
campaign.
marijuana shown to be less damaging to lungs than to tobacco, but they both damage lungs, but I think it's going to be one the like overinflated lungs thing that I just talked about, where like you're taking a super deep breath and then holding it in, versus like tobacco by itself is just much more harmful because of the chemical compounds that exist when it is burned.
So let me ask you this: what are the negatives with legalizing marijuana? There's a lot of dead air here. What are the negatives with legalizing marijuana? Can you think of any? Is marijuana, as it was painted during the early '90s, a gateway drug? You smoke some marijuana, now you're doing heroin next.
I don't buy that.
And then
My view is that
I can't
if heroin was
think of many negatives.
hold on, so I want to address the marijuana as a gateway drug thing. I think that like marijuana as a gateway drug is an accidental property where like if you eventually ended up doing cocaine or heroin or something and marijuana was the first drug, that's just because it was more available. You were going to do cocaine or heroin and marijuana just happened to be first. But it's not like marijuana caused you to say, well, I smoked some pot, so I might as well do a line now. Anybody that I know that has done any drugs whatsoever, be it pot or pot plus other things, or just other things, like the pot's not related to the other drugs. I can't think of a single person that says, it all started when I smoked my first joint.
Yeah, I don't see marijuana as a gateway drug. Let me ask you. I was trying to.
Shihiraba says weight gain.
Yeah, that could be a negative of weed.
Yeah, I know some fat potheads.
So, but I want to ask you kind of the level of drugs. So, I thought like caffeine, and then alcohol, and then weed, and then cocaine, and then like what's after that? Because then you get to like ecstasy, and then you get to like crack and meth. Then you get to heroin. So it gets dark pretty quick.
Yeah, but there's a really good there we go. Let me see if I can find it. Rankin President study, ranking crap. I need to this might work, but there's a lot of misconceptions.
Stumble across Google while we're live. I'm curious what you're looking for because I can imagine what you're looking for, and I imagine
so there's
exactly
like a two-way plot in terms of it's either a two-way plot or a four-way plot that kind of ranks the addictiveness of a drug and the harm that the drug does to you. And so like you could have a drug that is super addictive but not terribly harmful, and that would be something like nicotine, which nicotine by itself, ignore the fact that like smoking cigarettes is bad or anything else. Nicotine by itself doesn't do a lot of harm to the body. Like it's a mild stimulant, but you're not going to have like severe health effects unless you overdose on nicotine, which you can do. But nicotine by itself is not going to do a lot of harm to your body.
Have you ever overdosed? Have you ever overdosed on nicotine?
There's a difference between having too much and overdosing.
Well, I mean, I can tell you that I've had too much nicotine. Like I've tried some of that nicotine gum.
Yeah, and you get like lightheaded and like kind of nauseous.
Dizzy, nauseous. Yeah,
yeah, that's not overdose. Think
Wow.
about the difference between like drinking too much and alcohol poisoning.
Okay, fair enough.
Like,
Getting
have
your
I
stomach
drank
pumped
too much
versus
before?
just being drunk? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, another good example of drugs that are thought to be super harmful but actually aren't. And this is not me endorsing you doing these drugs. This is just laying out the facts.
Okay, I don't really want to do them. So
ecstasy or MDMA is very like
non-addictive, right?
I don't know about addictive, but in terms of like the harmful effects on the body, very minimal. Like the reason why ecstasy is considered dangerous is because a lot of times the environments in which it's taken in are dangerous environments. And so ecstasy causes you to engage in dangerous behaviors, but it's not the drug that's causing the harms to your body. It's the behaviors you're doing. So if you're at a rave and you're dancing and you're not drinking water, then you're going to get dehydrated and have problems there. And ecstasy made you feel so good that you didn't care that you were dehydrated. But like if you were to take ecstasy in an environment where you're not doing those behaviors, you're going to be okay. Now, there's other drugs like my mom is a psychology professor, and her area of study has been like one of the main ones has been drugs and human addiction. And I asked her, what's the worst drug you can do? And like at the snap of a finger, she just said meth.
On that note, we're going to lose the live stream. We'll carry a few minutes later on the TikTok and the Twitter, Twitch, Facebook, YouTube, but we're going to lose the Instagram stream. So we want to thank you guys for joining. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast so you can catch the full podcast. And look, if somebody tells you try this drug, you will like it, just say no, thank you. I know I will like it. I'm going to pass this time. Unless, of course, it's legal, then you're welcome to try it. But that's my advice. That's what I tell my my younger family members. Don't just tell them I know you'll like it. I know I'll like it. And that's usually the selling point. Try it, you'll like it. No, thank you. Thanks. I know I'll like it. On that note, though, we are off of Instagram, and we'll continue this conversation for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, so, like, meth and heroin are probably at the top in terms of harm. Meth being a pretty significant leader over heroin.
And why is this? Has your mom shared kind of the stats
Yeah.
or like what the factors are?
Well, let me explain how this works. So meth and cocaine should be considered in like the same area, and the reason is the receptors that they activate in the brain. So we all know what dopamine is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's the reward chemical of the brain. So you eat a good meal, you just had sex, you just won a game. The dopamine is going to be released. Dopamine makes you feel good. So what happens is you've got your two
feeling. I find a sex feeling to be better than the just had sex feeling. So I don't know if I
whatever.
All right, go ahead.
So anyways, you've got your receptors, and you can think about it like you've got one side and then you've got the receptor on the other. So the drugs, the neurochemicals come out of this side and they get absorbed on this side. And so what happens is, under normal circumstances, you've got some dopamine that's released, and then it gets what's called reuptaked. So it basically just gets absorbed back into the system and is no longer active, which is why, like, the rush that you feel from a dopamine hit does not last very long.
Mm-hmm.
So cocaine is what is called a dopamine reuptake inhibitor, which means that when you get a hit of dopamine, cocaine blocks the reuptake of it. So anytime something good happens, it doesn't fade away as fast. And like, if you're having lots of good things happen, then you can have a pretty significant buildup of dopamine in the brain that makes you feel good and continuing to feel better because it's not getting reuptaked. You can think about it like a bathtub where you plug the drain, where like you've got the water flowing out, that's the dopamine, the drain is the reuptake, and cocaine is kind of plugging the drain so that the water fills up. So that's cocaine. And you can see why it would be addictive, because it makes you feel better because you're getting more, like the water level of the tub is raising higher than it normally is.
Yeah.
All right. You know what meth does?
No.
So
I feel like it might destroy the receptors, though.
it does over time.
Okay.
But what meth does is cocaine doesn't affect the rate of dopamine being released. You've got the sink turned on and the water's coming out at whatever rate it was. It's just not draining as fast, right?
Okay.
Meth says, how much dopamine do you have in reserve right now? Go ahead and fire all of that off.
All of it. Okay.
You can see why that would be a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, because afterwards you are left empty and fiending for anything that's going to make you feel good.
Mm-hmm.
Which is likely you're not going to get that by eating a nice slice of pizza or having a good steak or having some sex. You're going to get that by having more meth.
Yeah, because the only thing that can compete with give me everything you've got is give me everything you got again.
Yeah. Let me share some live stats that we took during the podcast here. Let's see. So number one was, have you tried weed? And we didn't get too many results. We got about 40 results, and 64% are saying yes, they've tried weed, versus 36% are saying no, they have not.
That's about what I would have expected.
Yeah, so I mean, roughly 2/3 have tried weed. And then the next question was, which is better, smoking edibles or nothing? And 44% smoking. Only 11% says edibles, and then 44% says none.
Yeah, I'm in the none.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of like smoking weed, man. It's not like I actually like smoking cigarettes. I don't smoke cigarettes, but I like smoking cigarettes. Like every once in a while, I have a cigarette. I don't have that super addictive personality. The problem is I do like I'll smoke a cigarette in like 40 seconds, just the same way I drink, and probably not the best way to be smoking cigarettes. But I don't have that crazy addictive personality. When it comes to weed, I don't like the smell, and I'm not crazy about how weed makes me feel. You know, I've been lucky enough to try most things when I was also younger and broker. So even if I did like something, trying to get it back in the right, and when I mean broke, I mean like you're stretching a box of spaghetti over 3 nights broke, right? Like, and you're spending $1 on your lunch during the day. So you're spending $2. You're spending $4 over the course of 3 days for food. So that's what I mean by broke. And I've been lucky enough to have occupied those circles. And we talked about socioeconomic use. I've been lucky enough to occupy those circles when I was in a rough socioeconomic place. So there was no
Yeah, click
option.
the link that I just shared in the chat.
Okay, and this is the frontiersin.org
Yep.
or frontiersin.org. Because remember, we're live, so it's tough to
Yeah,
harm to
Frontiers.
users versus harm to others. So harm to others on basically all this stuff is pretty low. It looks like crack and meth and heroin are pretty high. Alcohol also surprisingly high. Cocaine also high. What's GHB?
GHB, roofies, date rape drug,
I would think
which
that
can
the
also be
harm-
used recreationally, like not for the use of others for your own purposes, but like dosing yourself with GHB.
So here's the thing, though, is when you say harm to others versus harm to users, typically the users of the date rape drug are not the not the people intentionally taking it. Versus alcohol, the users of the drug are the ones intentionally taking it. This is an interesting, yeah, but there's actually it's really pretty similar, the ratio of harm to others versus harm to users. I don't see anything that
Yeah,
drastically stands out. Heroin actually seems a bit, from what I'm looking at, seems like heroin and crack seem the highest.
yeah, and I wasn't able to find the exact chart that I wanted, but like I just don't see the reason to keep marijuana illegal when it is so much less harmful than alcohol by pretty much any metric.
It's, I mean, I couldn't, I couldn't think of great reasons to make it legal, but I could think of reasons to make it legal, and then I couldn't think of any reasons to make it illegal. Or keep it illegal, except for the major negative was the racial disparity. That for whatever reason, whether it's racism or not, I don't think it's just blatant, straightforward racism that cops are arresting minorities at a higher rate. I imagine there's some other factors like and like black people using it on the street or something. I can't
I
think
don't
of
know,
it. I can't think of good obvious reasons that just don't
but
sound racist.
yeah, but we'd have to.
I,
That's a
I,
completely separate topic to delve into the reasons for it.
But 94% versus 6% in New York City is almost like the police are out. And I mean, the people that are on the far left are going to say, yeah, that's how it is. But there are other factors involved there.
Yeah, but we don't have the time to research them right now.
Yeah.
Let's try and find something to wrap on.
Well, I think the wrap would really be that we both kind of agree that recreational marijuana, not just medical marijuana, but recreational marijuana should be allowed by the states, and that there's more harm in making it in keeping it criminalized. And when it comes to the majority of the other drugs, you shouldn't try them. And if something's illegal, also, if you're a non-marijuana user now and it is illegal in your state, you should probably still avoid it. You shouldn't, if you're, you shouldn't do things that are illegal. I think that's also a
Yeah,
good general rule.
but like the times that I've been out to California, like it's
You talk
completely
about
legal there.
hold on. Let me just acknowledge this. You keep talking about using weed in California, which is a place where
So
it's legal. So you're not doing
yeah, so
anything
it's
bad.
right.
You're not
So
breaking any
like
laws.
when I was there the last time I was there for like 8 days or whatever, and on like day 7, I had a very small dose of like a drink. Like I bought so of the entire drink that I bought, I might have had 25% of that one drink, and then I left the rest for my brother. Um, so it's like when I'm in California,
I
just
think I
because it's
remember you
legal
telling
doesn't
me about
mean
this.
that like, all right, first stop's dispensary.
Yeah, also because you don't have that addictive personality, which is a really good trait when it comes to drug use. But also, if you are, and this is a disclaimer,
As I
if
smoke
you
my e-cig.
if you are ever to try any drugs, which I suggest that you do not, because I think if you're asking yourself whether or not you're going to like them, the answer is yes. Because, idiot, they're fucking drugs. That's how they chemically affect your body. They chemically release chemicals that make you feel good. So you are going to like them. If it's illegal and you're not already doing it, it's not going to bring any value to your life.
Pretty much anybody who does drugs will say, "I wish I didn't start."
Yes, even if it's just a cost issue, they're spending a lot of money on drugs. But on that note, that's my leaving sentiment. Don't do drugs, people.
Yeah.
It's not good for you, and it's expensive as shit. Anything else you want to add, James? Raj?
Nah, I'm good.
All right, so that wraps this episode 180 of Sip Talk. Those of you who have listened this far live, make sure you go to YouTube. You go to the audio podcast platform of your preference and subscribe to us, and also click the links and read the copy in the description of the episodes, because we have some good questions, some fun links in there, and we would love to see you interacting and suggesting future episodes. So make sure you comment what you want to hear about. Thanks, Lisa, for joining on YouTube Live, and everybody on TikTok, and those of you who are on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch. Thanks for joining. On that note, thank you to Rash Galeb for feeding us your comments. Adios, everyone.
Cheers, guys.
All right, you made it to the end. If you haven't already subscribed, well, you know what you got to do. Otherwise, you have no business being here. You have no business having lasted this long into this podcast without being a supporter. I think it's only fair, don't you? All right, see you guys next time.
I like PBR. I just got priced out of it.